get into it right now. Give me a quick brief about yourself. Who are you, and kind of what were you doing before crypto?
Yeah, currently at 1KX, invest in early stage token networks. Yeah, we invest across all of DeFi, NFTs, social tokens, really with this thesis that, the key innovation of crypto is really with this idea that you can like take large scale technology networks and distribute the ownership of those, right? Yeah, and we sort of invested really early in each sort of area. So we're not really like we're not a DeFi fund, we're not an NFT fund, really see our core competency spread across everything. Yeah, mostly like, leading series, like seed deals and series A rounds right now. Last couple of years, mostly, I guess, worked on DAOs, most notably creating sort of MetaCartel DAO and sort of, helping foster the ecosystem of DAOs that sort of emerged from that. Created Venture DAO or MetaCartel Ventures, the first investment DAO in Ethereum, really questioning like, can groups of people like invest together? Yeah, before crypto was really just like a designer doing product design, UX design, and user research, just like talking to users. Yeah, that's really what I've been up to, I guess.
Yeah. What do you remember the first crypto you bought?
Yeah, I bought like ETH or something. Well, technically, the first crypto I ever touched was like in 2012 or 13, where I was like collecting Bitcoin from Bitcoin faucets, like barely like I had it I had it stuffed the wallet, and it's like got $70 of Bitcoin in it, right? But it was like cents back then, and I was just playing with it,
Got it. What year was that? Do you remember?
like 2012, 13.
Wow,
So
super early on.
I sort of, yeah, like I was aware of it, but I didn't really like see too much. It was like, this is just like instant money that might be a scam.
Yeah, you're just like, I'll just collect some of this right now. Like, why not? What's
just click on some ads, Like, I did that for like a couple of days and I got bored of it. Forgot about it.
Got it. Okay, I want to pivot into the discussion around DAOs. Okay, obviously that's one of your core competencies. You're very vocal about that on Twitter. And I want to just dive in. Where does your obsession with DAOs stem from? Did you have like a bad work experience, like at a corporation? You're like, fuck this shit, we need to do it differently. Like, how did your, like, where did this excitement for decentralized organizations come from?
Yeah, honestly, I don't like, didn't really care too much about DAOs until like I wanted to join Moloch DAO and I was like rejected from joining it. So for those who don't know, so Moloch is like the first ever real DAO on Ethereum. Like there was the DAO, which was like created in 2016, 15, and it was sort of hacked, right? And it didn't really exist anymore. But Moloch DAO was really the DAO that really like was born in early 2019, and yeah, like created a lot of the DAO movement there.
Got it.
Try to join it. It was sort of like a mini like elite club of ETH insiders, I guess rich ETH insiders, who are sort of a bit popular. And I wanted to join the experiment, but yeah, and I didn't really think too much of it until, yeah, I ultimately was not allowed to let in.
Why didn't they let you in? Do you know why?
Because I was poor and no one knew who I was. So there you go. Like basically a lot of the, being highly, a lot of this sarcastic, but just like, I mean, it was funny. Like, a lot of the pledges were really from ETH whales, like 100 ETH pledges at the time. Back then it was only 20 grand, right? But it still was like quite a lot of money compared to someone who was like pretty much broke at that time. Yeah. I had like maybe like, I don't know, I maybe had like 20, 30 ETH, and I was like, okay, I'm gonna try pledge like a third of like my savings on ETH into like this random job just to learn, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and just aside from a meme, like no one really knew who I was, and it was just too little of a money just rejected me, like a charity DAO,
Yeah.
So Amin and I had this chat afterwards. It was like, why don't you create your own DAO, fork Moloch? And I'm like, that'd be hilarious. And thus the adventure began.
And here we are. So
yeah.
what year was that? What year did you fork?
2019, like
2019.
months after it was created. Yeah.
Okay, and what's the current state of the DAO that you forked? Where is it now? How many members? What do you guys do? Give me the rundown.
Yeah, I mean, we created MetaCartel DAO, the first fork of Moloch, launched in like mid to early 2019. Then we created the first. Out of that, we gave grants and experimented DAOs. Created the first ever service guild, like DAO that provided services, which is like dev shop and design work, which is like Code Raid Guild. We created the first ever investment DAO on Ethereum, MetaCartel Ventures. We created some of the first experimentations on like decentralized brand economy, like decentralized brand DAOs with MetaFactory, originally called Swag DAO. And we worked on like decentralized reputation systems. Like we worked on the first ever like pot DAO that was like supposed to like coordinate parties in real life. It was actually supposed to be about sponsoring events, but just quickly devolved into like, let's like throw whiskey parties with this, and that was called RC DAO, created by Makoto from Kickback. So I would say like back then it was just like a group of like, I wouldn't be able to say how many people it part of like MetaCartel DAO, over 100 easily, and a part of the ecosystem probably like probably like 200-300 people like totally across the MetaCartel DAO ecosystem, if not more. And it was just like a bunch of people who like wanted to experiment with DAOs like back then, and this was the community where we hung out, right? And hindsight, it was just like a really nice time where like, nothing was worth anything. No one, was making money. It was just like pure experimentation for the sake of it. And yeah, I think like we've grown like really close as a community since then.
There's something special about decentralized organizations beyond that they just live on the internet. The most special part about these DAOs, and this is just from my own experience at Friends with Benefits, for example, is, all right, you're in this huge group chat with thousands of people, each respectively in their own city, each respectively have their own craft. And you don't know who anybody is until there's like an IRL event, an in-person event. And then you're like, oh, you're that guy. Oh, you're that guy. And there's something beautiful about being able to connect from a URL standpoint to an IRL standpoint. And it's something that I have yet to experience with another, I guess, traditional organization, because everybody's collectively building towards one mission in a new fashion. But when you get to scale, when you get to this thought of, I guess, organization, how do you think about leadership in a DAO? Because my experience with DAOs and starting DAOs in the past is that everybody's really required to be very self-disciplined, independent, organized, and like an alpha, basically, right? And take projects upon themselves. Like, how do you think about that? When you were starting your DAO, how did you approach leadership? Did you run into problems in the beginning? Walk me through that.
Yeah, I mean, the whole pattern was just like create more leaders. I think like my mental model was just like, get more people to start things and champion them and give them more responsibility, and give people responsibility that they usually would not be given, perhaps, right? And that's sort of like why, as part of MetaCartel's values, one of them is like bet on each other or bet on others, right, in the community. That was a heuristic that really led to, I think, like, or at least a set of values that really led to like this proliferation of all these DAOs. Because like when someone was thinking about like, should I create a DAO to like, create decentralized like brands, or like create a DAO for like, I don't know, services, we were basically all in unison, like, let's do it, and we pushed the people behind them to go and experiment. So I think that was a big part of it. We just like did things, we supported each other, we really pushed like this like culture of like experimenting and just doing, right? I think a lot of people are just talking about things and building infrastructure, where we really wanted to just like run and gun pretty much. Right?
Yeah. When you think, I guess, of organizational structure, what are like the core hats that need to be worn when initially starting a DAO?
You need leadership, as in like there needs to be it's about sort of like I guess you need a chef in the kitchen who's like really directing everyone who maybe own other responsibilities, right? Like in a kitchen, you have like the head chef, they manage the menu, they produce the menu, right? But like there's line cooks, there's sous chefs, right? Which like have responsibility over like this working on several of the dishes or key areas of the menu, right? So, different people may own different pieces of responsibility, but you always need a central coordinator around that, right? And usually what happens is like, when usually how these things scale is that, at least how we scaled is just like, I was coordinating a lot of it until a group of people who like took over, and that was known as like the Paladins, right? We set up like different roles within the DAO, and then the Paladins ran operations, and that group took over. And then, with each separate DAO, it was just like, pushing people to like into coordination roles. And then they sort of like usually, they usually set the tone of like, what is a DAO, collecting resources, setting goals and tasks. And then usually once they've, created an initial group of people, running in this same direction. You sort of then want to basically set up processes and systems to decentralize that central point of coordination, right? But to bootstrap any sort of DAO and community, I really do think you need that like central, warlord effectively, or summoner, right, of a DAO, to just drive things forward. I think, you just want to be pragmatic. Like centralized coordination is effective and efficient. It's fast, right? And I think you should definitely like rely on it when you can, because when you're big enough, you can't really, run in the same way and operate in the same way. So I think you want to make the most of those early days to really because early on you have like all this autonomy to craft and curate things as you can, at least as I saw the early stages of MetaCartel highly important of like who was involved, who I wanted to bring in, who we wanted to bring in. And we could do it very surgically. As it grew, less so. And today, like I'm meeting people who are part of the MetaCartel ecosystem who are like, I've never met before, but like a part of Raid Guild. And it sort of works because each group that's spun out has sort of maintained the overarching MetaCartel culture, even though DAOs are doing wildly different things, right? And it's definitely a lot less curated, but that's sort of how the DAO, I think DAOs really become curated later on. It's just, or coordinated. It's like just the fractalization, right? And you're the one who, as a coordinator in the beginning, you're the one who I think like sets a tone of like, creates like the DNA, right? The double helix in which spawns everything else, right?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I love your analogy for the restaurant example. It's the first example that I've actually heard be used in that type of way. One, I think it's a very digestible way to understand these. And as creators and more of these Web3 communities spur, like they're going to be looking for resources and examples to bridge their organizations from. So perfect example, you have your line cook, right? You have your head chef, you have all these different components managing the kitchen. But I guess the next question is, so you have all these people in this organization, everyone's collectively building. How do you think about reputation? And I know there's different models to kind of assign reputation in terms of points rather than wealth, for example, right? Because it's one of the biggest discussions around DAOs. If you have more money, you have more power, and we kind of want to refrain from that, or at least some groups do. How do you think about rep with all of your experience managing and starting DAOs?
Yeah, reputation. Reputation, I guess it allows you to trust others a lot more, right? It's basically I guess social coordination duct tape, right? A lot of it exists without really it being formalized. Like a lot of the early stages, early on for a lot of DAOs, it's I think whoever's coordinating is really just the central ledger book of reputation for each of its each of its contributing members, right? And as you go over time, you I definitely think it makes sense to set up some sort of reputation system to account for who did what, because as you grow as a group, you can't really, I guess it's sort of Dunbar's number, right? You don't know who's who anymore, right? It's harder to keep track of that, at least mentally. And I think for MetaCartel, we never really went past that stage yet. We still heavily rely on individual key community members to vet for people and I guess vouch for new members and new projects, right? Definitely see a lot of other communities that need sort of more formalized reputation systems, but for us, we're just growing fairly slowly. And what is MetaCartel today? It's more like a group of DAOs that are focused on each of their own goals, and who's in MetaCartel is more like a curated list of who we trust, right?
Yeah. No, it makes sense. And all these people that you trust, have you met all of them, or these are just all internet characters that have kind of got referrals from other people that you've trusted?
Yeah, I've mostly met all of them over the last 3-4 years.
Got it. Cool.
Initially it was just people who aggregated online first and offline, right?
Yeah.
It's that's definitely a cool pattern.
Yeah, no, for sure. One thing that's so beautiful to watch about DAOs is it only takes really, you could say one person, but really 2-3 people to kind of align on an idea, pool some capital, right? That's controlled by multiple people, and then inspire other people with that vision and that mission of what you're trying to create, and hopefully align them, right? And you guys are at a point where you're really established, you're really advanced, you have your systems in place. I'm assuming, right? I'm not in those organizations particularly, but just for example, seeing how these events that's going to happen in Denver soon. So shout out to MCon that's happening September 15th, right? just to see that process come together and that coordination is really cool, right? And a lot of people, they don't know each other. People are just excited to jump in and participate and contribute. That's the beauty behind crypto. That's the beauty behind DAOs. But when you're starting these organizations, okay, and let's take this from a creator's point of view, for example, when you're starting these, and I think some creators will call them like modern day fan clubs and trying to align then rally their communities and their fan bases to kind of partake more in their journey, or at least more of their active fans. When you're starting these DAOs, how do you think about community building? And I only asked this question because you wrote an awesome article back in June titled How to Grow Decentralized Communities. And for anybody that's listening or watching, I'll leave the link in the show notes. But I want you to kind of walk me through that because it was a very detailed article, and I'll pull up a graph that you put together, and I'd love to kind of like pick that apart with you for a minute.
There is no like recipe for the process of community building for DAOs. Like depends, and it depends entirely what the DAO is for, right? What the goals of a DAO are. So like you can go from DeFi, like DAOs that own like DeFi protocols, to all the way to like DAOs that basically manage treasuries and funding, right? Like or DAOs that are purposely are focused on services, DAOs that are purposely focused on social curation as a social club, right? And so the process in which you like basically launch a DAO entirely depends on like what the DAO is doing, what its purposes are, how it's evolving from. Is it starting from ground zero? Is it starting from an existing product or a set of assets, right? Like it really depends where you're coming from. So, and for each of these sort of veins, right, and archetypes of DAOs, the sort of patterns of that emerge with like how do you bootstrap them? How do you launch these token networks around them? It entirely depends on like the goals and sort of the stakeholders of each DAO.
Sure. But I still think there's some beauty behind the chart that you put together, and I'll show it just for the sake of those who are watching.
Sure.
If you're not watching and you're listening, go check it out in the show notes. But I think there's some like systematic approach into how you structured this graph, because I think it's super applicable for a lot of DAOs. Okay, that's why I want to bring it up. So the article is titled "How to Grow Decentralized Communities," and you go into a few paragraphs about giving some briefs, and then you dive into this awesome graph titled "The Community Building Process for Token Networks." And I'll zoom in here, okay? And it starts with three tiers, 1, 2, and 3, narrowing down into a funnel. The first one is attracting potential community participants. The second one is getting community members engaged. And number 3 is consolidating community ownership, okay? I'd love for you to kind of walk me through those 3 tiers and share your insight as to what you kind of meant for each of those pieces.
Right, definitely. I guess this would be a much more of a like abstract. It was like a mental model, right, which I wanted to share, which was, to really like create like a community of stakeholders that actually really care about the project and participate in governance, participate in the network, like how in all sorts of ways, right? Like effectively, you need to. It's all about sort of fostering like to create a great community. You sort of have to foster a sense of ownership. And so ownership is like what drives governance participation outside of monetary incentives. It drives, like product feedback. It drives, hiring. It drives working group contributions. It drives all these areas of like a DAO, a decentralized organization that you sort of need to like fill, right? And it's very hard to sort of manually like, address, I guess, like find community members, unless you are able to like bootstrap this like ownership, right? And how do you get to ownership? You have to build a relationship, and before you even are able to build a relationship, you have to attract and like communicate, and like find potential community members that resonate or like a fit for the community itself, right? So it's really just going backwards of like, how do we foster ownership? How do we get to the position to foster ownership? And then how do it's really like how do we attract the right people? And I think that roughly when we're thinking about like, when we're roughly thinking about like the whole process of like building a community, like getting to end state where there is like a cloud, like a group of people, at least how I define community is really a group of people who are collaborating one-on-one in a many-to-many fashion on a shared set of goals and, with a set of values, right? And to get to that place, it's like, this is sort of roughly the process you have to go regardless of what you're building effectively. And it is a bit abstract in the sense of like, it's just ownership. But yeah, for each and every network, recently, I would even tweak this a bit and one realization recently was that, some communities might actually want to maximize, community participation, right? Some communities might actually want to minimize community participation in the token network itself, right? Like governance minimization to some extent.
Right.
And different communities can leverage network participation in different ways, right? For some, it's used to de-risk platform risk, right? For some others, it's used to crowdsource, right? Like participating in the network means crowdsourcing of ideas or projects, or in the case of say index co-op, right? Like the launching, the development of index products, right? Like they might want to maximize that, right? So like it, like as we sort of better understand what are the different types of token networks, it's starting to there's these themes that emerge, right? So it's not always so black and white of like we want to build maybe the biggest community. I think it's really about like identifying like who are the stakeholders that matter for the end success of the network, right? Or project, and then going from that, and then building out like these sort of funnels effectively that like bring people through to become a community member.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And what's up, guys? Adam Levy here. Sorry for the quick pause, but I want to give some love to our 5 NFT sponsors who are making this episode happen. They are Coinvise, POAP, Cello, Social Stack, and Prime DAO. First off, on Coinvise, you can create a personal or community-owned social token on Ethereum. Coinvise also helps you create incentives through token rewards and bounties, NFT business models, and bot integrations for Discord. Discover more by visiting coinvise.co today. Next up, we have POAP, or short for Proof of Attendance Protocol, who enables a novel way of creating one's life diary. Leveraging NFT technology, POAP facilitates an easy way to mint non-fungible tokens related to meaningful events. It's frequently used in crypto-native communities, and now it's starting to create NFT collectors in the mainstream too. Collect or launch your own POAP today by visiting poap.xyz. Next up, we have Social Stack, a platform for communities, brands, and creators to build mission-driven social token economies. Offering an easy-to-use, non-custodial wallet with a suite of open-source community engagement tools, Social Stack makes it simple to bring your community into Web3 and be a part of creating an open-source, gratitude-driven future for social tokens. Create a free social token wallet, discover mission-driven social token communities, or apply to launch your own token on Social Stack by visiting socialstack.co today. Next up, we have Cello. Are you looking for an ecosystem of dApps, currencies, and tokens that can connect you with people no matter their device, carrier, or country? Well, say hello to Cello, a mobile-first platform that makes crypto dApps and payments accessible to anyone with a mobile phone. Cello supports thousands of projects from builders, developers, and artists who every day build applications and issue tokens from all over the world. Visit celo.org today to learn more. And last but not least, we have Prime DAO, a collective of DeFi builders and DAO veterans attempting to turn DeFi into a more cooperative ecosystem by creating DAO-to-DAO interactions. The first solution to go live is Prime Launch, a launchpad experience for DAOs built in collaboration with Balancer. If you plan on launching a DAO, head over to prime.xyz to access a network of partners and tools that will jumpstart your DAO development today. All right, back to the episode. Yes, let's do this really quick. I'm messing around with the views here. And consolidating community ownership is one of the most exciting components for me, is simply because, well, you're getting the people that love what you do involved beyond them just using or interacting. Now they have a stake, they have a say. Now they feel more aligned because they have skin in the game, right? And there's power to that. And you weren't really able to do that before in a more, I guess, emotional manner. Like when you buy a stock, for example, sure, you technically, legally have ownership, but you're not in the boardrooms like contributing, you're just listening through Robinhood's voice app, You're not an active member in Apple's calls or Apple's decision making. Here, your voice can be heard because it can be traced, it can be tracked. You can see how many tokens you own. You can view and kind of track and I guess just see your engagement and your level of activity in these groups. And as you know, DAOs are already picking up a ton of traction online across crypto Twitter and beyond. And I think companies are starting to kind of get FOMO. It's like, okay, how can I use this DAO model and integrate it in my product management and build a community or build a product around my community versus build a community? You know what I mean? Like, how do I integrate these models and build in public without giving away too much too early, right? So let's give an example, okay? So let's say you're building a consumer app or a web app, right? And you want to kind of take the components of DAOs in terms of how communities are involved in their ownership, but you don't want to give up too much, I guess, governance rights to these individuals. You want to keep the core team, the core product and its team, you know, like somewhat centralized, but still build in production. Is there a way to mix the two? Like, how would that work? Like, how do you form a DAO without giving up all of the governance rights, you know, and bringing and exposing yourself completely? Like, how do you keep it focused and narrowed and then expand gradually? How does that work?
Well, what is the DAO's point, like goal and end goal in general? You sort of have to go from there, and all your decisions revolve around like compromises. There. So like, I wouldn't even start with that question. It's like, you know, it's not about holding on to, like, yes, you want to early stage when you're building a product that wants to be decentralized early on, you want to have a lot more control over it, right? Especially when you need to curate the community participation, build it out, make quick decisions, move fast, right? But yeah, like, you know, what different projects have different levels of decentralization, where they give away different levels of ownership away to the community. This is all dependent, right, on like what your end goals are.
Yeah.
Like, if you're trying to build like a like $100 billion financial primitive, right, where, you know, you want like nation states to trust you, yeah, you probably like want to give more than like, you know, you probably want to have a fairly decentralized network, right? Where, you know, like, but if you're really building an application where you want community like participation to some extent, you want community to find upside in the project, you want to decide like a network ownership that helps you get to the end state that you want to go for. And for some projects, it's going to be you know, they might give away like say 30% of the tokens to community. Some might give away 50. And the beautiful thing is that projects are going to compete for the same customers, right, with their own network. So, and if you're end consumer, like picking two products, like you will either pick the product that gives you like, I don't know, if you're like using, you know, we pick the product that gives you less tokens or the one with more tokens or more ownership, right? And it depends, like which product's better, you know,
yeah,
which product or community do you resonate the most with? Maybe it's the same all around, and you just want the one that actually cares about, you know, the users or yourself the most, right?
yeah.
It really depends. So like, this is a fluctuating sort of like parameter that, you know, you want to find, you know, there's no right answer to.
Yeah, you know, I only bring that question up because I personally got super inspired by YFI's community and specifically Andre Cornier, right? And how he tests in production and how he's super vocal about all of his development. And he just lets everybody, you know, just like see what I'm doing. This is what I'm doing. Play at your own risk. And also what Friends with Benefits is doing now with their fundraise, you know, they're getting investment from strategic partners, and it's a really community effort to bring that capital in. It's not just like the few core contributors that started FWB. Like, no, guys, we're gonna get money because we need to pay people full time. Let's take it from this a community point of view where, okay, we want to build this community. We want to build products around our community to empower everyone and start a business here, whatever. But you guys are a core component of that. So I think it's just interesting how these like communities are kind of shaping currently and how they're encouraging more community involvement. One thing I want to kind of pivot to is you obviously with having these token prices publicly traded, anybody can access and buy them. You want to try to build a community that encourages participation versus speculation, right? And the reality is whether these creators are launching tokens, whether it's Web3 organizations, products, whatever it may be, the reality is I guess one of the biggest problems people have is like, how do you instill a sense of ownership within a community that transcends beyond the purpose of the token, right? So how do you encourage people not to just speculate, but to contribute? Have you thought about that? Have you figured out ways to kind of approach that?
Yeah, most projects launch a token with incentives and then try to use incentives to attract participation, whereas you're supposed to actually really, you know, find contributors or community members, and then like, you know, really like, you know, like I guess like find a middle ground between the intrinsic and extrinsic for them to participate. So you're going to start a participation and then reward that. right? It's like most projects, yeah, you just get tokens that are just like, you know, sold and like farmed and dumped, and just like, you know, it becomes a fairly transactional environment. So yeah, like when we work with projects at 1KX, it's really just like the methodology, at least approach that we take, is really, you want to build a community first, right? Find community participation or network participation. And then once you understand what the network looks like, how we will likely design it, who are the most important stakeholders, it's really then designing like a distribution system or a token distribution plan that really rewards the most valuable, you know, network participants, right? Rather than going backwards from like incentive design. Like that doesn't really work, at least from our perspective.
Okay, got you. Another question I have for you is, as DAOs approach more of the mainstream world, okay, and you see more of these, again, these creators, internet personalities, Instagram influencers, whatever, building these modern day decentralized fan clubs, is that something that excites you or worries you? Like, do you think that would be good for the space or toxic for the space as you bring more of these like normies speculating on themselves and their communities? How do you feel about that?
Great. Yeah, whatever friction will hit it anyway. So the thought, you know, I think that Web3 is a democratizing power, like, you know, that will empower communities, participants, while at the same time, you know, like people are going to fall victim to like scams and, you know, like others taking advantage of people in a totally new paradigm, right? So I don't really think any of like, I think it's inevitable. I think we should have, approach it with, I don't think there's a reasonable way to approach something so powerful, such as Web3, so carefully. Like that's a very naive sort of standpoint. Like the internet hit society like a wave of bricks.
Yeah.
You know, hackers were roaming the internet like, you know, freaking like phishing people, hacking into systems that were unsecure, people falling, prey. At the same time, you know, all these internet industries emerged. All these people, we got like online shopping, we got all these other services. As much as I like to say that, like I'm definitely excited by the emergence of like mainstream, adoption and actual use cases there. But I think it comes with the good and bad, I guess. And it is what it is, I guess.
Yeah. Okay. I want to pivot into, I guess, one of my more personal favorite topics, NFTs. Okay. It's obviously very much on your radar. You guys are one of the earliest investors at 1KX. I want to ask you a series of questions here, starting with, how do you make sense of what's happening with JPEG Summer? How do you like wrap your head around that?
Yeah, it's a good point. I think that there's a lot of musical chairs, of course, right? But I think what is happening is that, at least 1KX's sort of thesis around NFTs is that, we're not like, we think art and collectibles were like a great initial beachhead for like, what NFTs could be. And they were sort of like the obvious use cases, right, for NFTs. But we're much more interested in like the financialization of NFTs themselves, right? Like basically everything on the internet is an NFT. It just hasn't been sort of like, introduced or minted into the Web3 economy. And when they do, you really actually need like, protocols that unlock financial value from, the property rights of NFTs, right? So we're really excited about things like, Nifty-Fi, where it's like you can basically like, take your NFT and as collateral and get a loan from that, right? Like if you're like an Instagram influencer, you can't actually go to the bank and get a loan for like your Instagram posts, right? Because it's not a real job, no one cares about it. But in the world of NFTs, like you can get your rocks, whatever you want, your pengers, and you can go and like get a loan for that, and you might get a loan for your videos that might generate revenue, or even your tokenized video revenue rights, or your articles, right? And so we think that that's really the future, and we actually overlooked a lot of the profile photo, like initially in the first week. We were like, what's going on? We didn't really get it, but then we realized that amidst like the musical chairs and hot potato games that were really playing, there was a certain section of like the NFT economy around, especially around profile photos, where like these profile photos or like avatars actually represented the ownership, like it represented ownership of a certain community's collective identity, right? So I think like Punks is definitely one, Bored Apes, and other projects, right? Maybe they eventually become like, I think there's like a line between becoming an established sort of community and being like this game of like, you know, hot potato. But we sort of then sort of had this really interesting, epiphany of like, hey, it's actually about like the is it online ownership here. So, you know, I think that's our explanation of that. And, you know, but actually, yeah, we're quite excited by this revelation because it's like, it's actually another take on identity that was, you know, like completely different to like, I think a lot of people have tackled and tried to solve like, understand what is identity from a very purely technical angle, like from standards angle. But
right.
you sort of see this as like, this is like identity being understood from like a social angle, which makes a lot more sense actually.
Yeah, no, that you know, you're seeing everybody buy like the Pudgy Penguins, and you're seeing now Budweiser buy like this rocket and beer.eth, and you're seeing more of these like normie orgs step into the place and try to attach themselves to the culture of crypto, right? And think about that. A few years ago, crypto wasn't as cool as it is today. It's really become more of that cool kids club that normies want to be a part of, right? Partly because there's the financial incentive of investing and watching your assets either appreciate or depreciate, and the gambling that comes from that. And then it's also just like being a part of something new, this new revolution, this new form of identity, this new wave of ownership, and what it means to kind of be a part of something that you can prove and that you can contribute to on the internet. I think it's one of the most beautiful things that I've come across, to see all like just like these PNG and JPEG revolutions and people buying GIFs and Fidenzas and all these like cool pieces of art. What are you guys looking at 1KX? Are you guys investing in the profile pictures? Are you guys more on the equity investment side? What are you looking for?
Yeah, we generally don't buy NFTs themselves individually as a fund. You know, we try to look for, as a general sort of like strategy, we try to look for investments that really get exposure across a broad area, right? So we sort of look for index bets. So we haven't, you know, really found it yet, at least for the avatar space. But I definitely agree with you around that thesis, is that like, at least early on in MetaCartel, when we created MetaFactory, you know, the thesis for mass adoption was actually like, our thesis then was actually like mass adoption was not, I guess, you know, even for further context, there's a lot of discussion around like UX being the barrier for mass adoption, and like, and you know, US technologies like abstracting away crypto, and we thought that was a part of the puzzle. But our thesis for mass adoption was that it's actually going to happen crypto natively. Like, it's sort of like hip hop, right? Hip hop was extremely niche, you know, created by really like Black communities from like, let's say, you know, like New York, right? Like, like it really came from a place that was so niche, so unique, had such a unique sort of identity, and that became cool. And others wanted to be part of that, as opposed to you know, hip hop did not, you know, try to appeal to anything else. It was itself, and it said fuck you to everything else, right? So, and I think like our thesis with MetaFactory was exactly like, we want to actually like expose the coolest parts of Web3, like digital ownership, DAOs, collecting NFTs, digital property rights, royalties, you know, to the rest of the world. And we sort of started with like digital physical clothing, where like we had rare pieces of clothing with, you know, where they were sort of attached with rare and collectible NFTs themselves, right, with an RFID chip in the clothing. So this thesis is definitely sort of playing out, where like mass adoption is actually happening for like the crypto native side of things, you know, whereas a lot of people try to solve it like, how do we like do the same thing, you know, in Web 2 but with Web 3, you know, like, which weren't terribly too interesting, you know, like, yeah.
What a great analogy. The comparison between the rise of hip hop to the rise of crypto. And I'll even argue that crypto is going to be bigger than hip hop in its own respectful way. Obviously, they're two different components, but yeah, what a good analogy to see the rise of something that was like so of a fuck you mentality. This is our culture. This is how we feel, and this is how we express ourselves. And if you want to be a part of us, come join us, you know, our way.
Basically, yeah.
Crypto is very much that level of mentality and that aggressiveness and that level of anarchy that you don't really see in any other space as of now. So the projects that you guys are investing in, okay, I know you mentioned about the intersection between DeFi and NFTs. Obviously, there's a lot of excitement right now. People are talking about that across crypto Twitter. What other use cases kind of get you fired up for NFTs beyond DeFi?
Yeah, I think yeah. So aside from financialization, like NFT financialization protocols, I think um, that well, we sort of see it as like that's almost like the melting block, right, between like all the creativity that spawns off digital assets and how they sort of become valuable, or at least how people can extract value from that, right? Um, yeah, I think like the use cases of that are less specific to products and technologies, but rather the fact that like NFTs and digital, and the fact that like you can permissionlessly enter this like financial economy without needing to be over 18 and get, and like I remember when I was like 13 on the internet, like I was trying to like freelance and do motion design, right? And I had to like get my parents to like sign up for a PayPal and then like, like get a PayPal account that way. Like, I was like, like the use case of like the NFTs, I feel like it's like you can create these financial assets, right? As a 13-year-old or 12-year-old and get into business like from day one, if you wanted to, right? Like on a side chain. And I think that's like this permissionless like economy is actually the key use case. Will probably like lead to really cool things. I think it's just like it's an entire platform itself. This existence of a economy.
Yeah, one thing that I'm personally excited about is all these like future consumer applications that are going to kind of stem from either the social side of NFTs or the marketplace side of NFTs or merely the portfolio management side of NFTs that we have yet to see. Right now, if you think about it, the current state of NFTs it's very much desktop driven, right? There is no real mobile marketplace yet that allows people to buy and sell stuff on the go. It's something that you have to access through your MetaMask wallet, and just the user flow is really messed up. And I know you mentioned it's not a UX thesis, it's more of a crypto native thesis, but I'd argue something different. I'd say actually a lot of people, they need to understand what a dumbed down version of this looks like. People kind of get overwhelmed still by MetaMask. People still kind of get overwhelmed by OpenSea and all the data and the search and basically finding alpha, understanding what JPEGs do I buy, how do I buy, etc. So something that I'm personally excited about. Anything on your radar on that end?
I don't disagree. Like I think that my point with the use cases was that that thesis was that we really needed to like, this was, I guess the context was like 2019 and 18, right? Like we needed to solve for exciting use cases first, and then once we've solved that, then the next like limiting factor was like user experience, right? And I think we're definitely at the point where like I think the future of social are like groups of people collecting NFTs together, right? Like it's groups of people buying and trading NFTs from one another. It's creating NFTs together as a group, right? It's meeting one another in these like DAOs, and I think that slowly, maybe we don't call this sort of activity DAOs or NFT collecting. Who knows what the language and how we'll abstract it, but it'll sort of, I do think it'll look somewhat similar to this, right? And this is how people will meet and connect with one another nowadays, right? At least in the future. And yeah, I think that like with user experience, I think it's sort of like a matter of time before someone figures out how to take really the interesting bits of the crypto native and like bring it to the masses, right? And maybe it happens from a top-down angle, like there's a Steve Jobs that invents like the product, or maybe there's no. It's a much more decentralized approach where you just have different ecosystems, right? That emerge and slowly solve for like greater adoption, right? Because it's not like boom, they like go from like 0 to 1, like 0 to a million users like overnight with the invention of like a better interface, right? It's where are you at? Like we're like growing our user base for generally Web3 and the NFT economy fairly quickly itself. So I think it's just like this expanding like bubble. No pun intended. Like that's just growing and growing in width.
In my point of view, we're seeing the rise of all these different innovative protocols, whether they be curation protocols, proof of attendance protocols, marketplace protocols for NFTs. And I think it'd be cool to see all these different like puzzle pieces kind of come together in a nice, I don't know, more mainstream type of way, because users need curation. Users need to kind of create a diary of where they've attended and what they've attended, right? Users need a marketplace. And I think there's a beauty behind working in a decentralized fashion, bringing all these different puzzle pieces and making one beautiful picture. We'll throw that out there.
My favorite.
Go ahead.
Just to add to the puzzle analogy, my favorite analogy is like Web3 and crypto and DeFi and Web3 in general is like a huge Sudoku puzzle, right? And you're just like, you're maybe like filling in blocks a bit blindly, and none of it might make too much sense until you like maybe you fill in the right box and suddenly you just unlock all these other like boxes, right, in the Sudoku puzzle that just suddenly become super, super like obvious, right? And I think like, the lull and bear market we had in like, especially in DeFi, I think like in 2019, 18, it was like sort of the two boxes that we filled that like really unlocked everything were like lending markets and AMMs, like Compound and Uniswap, right? And those two financial primitives unlocked like the rest of DeFi.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. For NFTs, we're like, maybe with bringing NFTs to the mass market, it's like NBA Top Shot proves that like people understand collectibles, right? It's like take NFTs. Big question was like, do people actually understand this? Okay, they brought it to the NBA like sort of collector, at least fan, like the NBA. I don't know what you call this group of people who are like hardcore.
They're the most active fans. They're the most active fans.
Exactly.
You have the people that watch on TV, and then you have the people that go and attend the games, buy the jerseys, buy the cards, buy the branded cups, and freaking paint their faces and shit, and those are the most active fans. You're giving the more active fans a sense of community, a sense of ownership in the things that they love and they support already. I want to pivot into one final question, okay? And this is something that I'm asking, or I'm starting to ask everyone, at least on season 2. Okay, so I'm a big fan of the development of the internet, specifically how the transition from Internet Web 1, then from Internet Web 2, and how kind of Internet, Web 2 ate Web 1. So let's paint this picture. Web 1 was very much static, right? It was very much read only. You couldn't really do much other than kind of browse information in an unorganized fashion. Web 2 came around. You had more advanced products like Google, like Facebook, Instagram, that created more UX, UI layers on top of this scattered virtual world, okay? You had companies like Uber, a lot of mainstream centralized corporations, and this whole rise of data control and data aggregation and what that entailed. And now we're seeing the development of what we like to call Web 3, which is a decentralized version of social networks, decentralized ownership. And Web 2 ate Web 1, and the bet is that Web 3 is going to eat Web 2. What's going to eat Web 3?
Yeah, I have no clue. I thought about this before. Yeah, we're probably going to be like, considered the next boomers by the time that really happens. And we're going to be like most likely blind to, the next wave of what happens, right? Yeah, I don't know. It's a really good question. Everyone eventually becomes a dinosaur, like it's part of the cycle.
Yeah, I think that's a good place to end off. Everybody's becoming a dinosaur. Shout out to my dinosaurs. Peter, before I let you go, quickly plug yourself. Where can we find you, 1KX, and everything that you're working on?
Twitter is the best. My username, if you search it in, you'll find me easily. Always available for DMs. Yeah.
Amazing, dude. Thank you so much. And I hope to have you soon as 1KX develops and MetaCartel and all these really cool projects that you're working on. So we'll be in touch. Thank you.